Hey everyone. So I've been learning Japanese for around 3 months now, and I thought I'd make a progress update video to have an actual way of tracking my progress each month. I also just enjoyed watching these type of videos when I first started. I found a pretty good motivation to see where I could be at in 3 to 6 months if I just stick with it. So I guess I'll quickly talk about why I started learning Japanese and what I'm currently doing. So I actually started last year in around September. I learned hiragana and katakana and quickly realized that I wasn't really sure where to go after that, so I ended up quitting. I started up again in January this year, mostly because I have a 3-month trip to Japan planned for the start of September. So I kind of wanted to be at a decent speaking and reading level so I could get by and not really struggle as much. Also, like a lot of people that learn Japanese, I just had a general interest in anime and manga. So after I started up again in January, I quickly learnt the kanas again and faced the same problem of not really knowing where to go after that. While browsing the Learn Japanese subreddit, I saw a lot of people mentioning Genki, so I decided to try it myself. But after maybe 3 or 4 days of that, I quickly realised that if I continued, I'd probably just quit again. I also spent a couple of days on Duolingo and Wanikani and came to the same conclusion as Genki that probably not right for me. Didn't enjoy it at all. So it was around this time that I found the Lever Kiwi channel and pretty much watched all of his Japanese learning content. I found them pretty useful to know what to avoid doing and kind of what steps to take to succeed. I eventually downloaded Anki and started using the Core 2K 6K deck. I wish at the time I knew about the Tango N5 and N4 decks, because I think they're a bit easier to get into, but overall I'd say I'm pretty happy with the core deck. I think after a while of using it, maybe 600 or 700 cards in, you hit a wall of just business related vocab. I wish I suspended a lot of those earlier that even now I haven't seen in any immersion that I've done. But apart from that, now that I'm used to using the deck, I'm pretty happy with the content inside. So for around the first month and a half, I was doing 15 Anki cards per day. I saw a lot of people recommend 5 to 10, and I kind of went with that for a while. I was also spending around 2 or 3 hours a day just watching Japanese streams on Twitch or videos on YouTube. I don't really think it helped that much overall. It's kind of hard to measure how useful that kind of immersion is, but overall I'm pretty happy with the first month. I'd say it set me up with a decent foundation to start going into immersing. At this point I found Matt's channel along with Refold, which kind of pushed me into actually just starting to immerse. I also found the Moe way, which to me has the best resource list for learning Japanese. So after I decided to start immersing, I wasn't entirely sure what kind of content I wanted to go into first. It was around this time that I found Animelon. It's basically just watching anime online with Japanese subs. So I ended up deciding to start immersing with anime first. I also pushed my Anki cards per day up to 35 for the core deck and started sentence mining, which was 7 cards per day. I think I'm pretty happy with these numbers now, but at the beginning it was a bit of a struggle. It took me around 2 hours to finish Anki per day, which I pretty quickly was burning out of, so I needed to change something. I realised that I just ignored advice on how to set up Anki properly at the beginning by only using the again and good buttons. So I changed my method for that, and now I think I'm down to around an hour, maybe an hour 15 per day for Anki. So I started tracking my immersion times. Found it a pretty good way of keeping myself accountable per day of how much immersion I'm actually doing compared to what I feel like I'm doing. I know at the start I felt like I was doing a lot more than I actually was. I was aiming for around 6 hours of immersion per day. After around a week of tracking both passive and active immersion, I decided to drop my passive tracking, mostly because I feel like I was being a bit dishonest with how much I was actually doing. I was still doing a lot of passive listening, I just wasn't tracking it. So going into actual immersion, I started with teasing Master Takagi-san, first and second season. It wasn't too hard to follow along with. I think I found the first season harder than the second one. I would try to listen and read the subtitles, but I'd say it was mostly just reading. I think I could follow along pretty well with what was happening most of the time. There were a few episodes, I think it was the end of the second season. It was a festival episode and I understood absolutely nothing. But overall, a really good experience. I'm glad I started with this anime. After finishing the first 2 seasons of that, I moved on to The Moon is Beautiful. It was definitely a lot harder to get into. They were speaking in longer sentences, and quite often there would be more than one person speaking at the same time, so it was hard to follow just by listening. So for the most part, I was just relying on the subtitles again. I was also able to follow mostly along with what was happening. I wasn't really interested in the actual show that much, so I don't think I got as much out of it as I did with the first 2 seasons of Takagi-san, but overall still a good experience. After that I moved on to Non Biyori, which I'd seen a lot of people mentioning that it was a pretty easy anime to get into, but I think because there was so much vocab related to the countryside, I struggled a lot with this. I began pausing a lot more to actually read what was being said and trying to understand the sentence structure. Overall, I think this helped, but the time for watching a single episode went from 20 minutes to 30, sometimes longer. I think at the beginning of this, it was pretty demotivating, but by the end of it, I could mostly follow along with what was being said. Apart from the very last episode, I understood next to nothing. I then moved on to Yuru Camp, which has been my favourite anime so far. I really enjoyed the setting. It was just kind of chill and relaxing, and didn't really feel like I was having to put too much effort into immersing. It just kind of naturally watching it as if I was watching in English. I was definitely pausing a lot more than before though, to try and fully understand before moving on to the next sentence, and kind of got a bit burnt out of watching anime after this. I think an episode was up to around 40 to 50 minutes, and even though I really enjoyed the show, I don't think I would have been able to do it if I didn't. I was kind of over watching anime at this point, but I wasn't really feeling ready to just go straight into reading, so I ended up watching the second season of Non Biyori. I was a lot more comfortable this time with the vocab used and could follow along for the most part without pausing. I think that definitely helped my motivation, not spending 40 minutes per episode. After I finished the second season of that, I then moved on to a few different anime. Couldn't really stick with one, so I decided to just start reading. So at this point, I think I'd immersed around 50 hours of watching anime. I'd like to say that that counted as listening immersion, but realistically I think it was mostly reading, which definitely helped with going into my first visual novel. At the beginning of just starting the visual novel, it was really intimidating and pretty demotivating. There were times where I just kind of wanted to quit, especially after the first hour or two of reading. I was close to just quitting, but I saw a comment of someone saying that your first visual novel was going to be pretty hard regardless of your reading level, so you may as well just stick with it, and that resonated pretty well with me. So I ended up reading for about 40 to 45 hours, I think, and while I did enjoy it, I kind of underestimated how long a 40-hour visual novel would take to read in a different language. I was reading at around 3,000 to 4,000 characters per hour, which is pretty slow to be reading at. So I ended up just wanting to try something new, and I moved on to light novels. I started reading I Had That Same Dream Again. It was pretty daunting, just seeing a wall of text, but with a lot of help from Yomi-chan, I'd say it went pretty well. After around the first 10 hours, I was becoming a lot more comfortable with reading and trying not to rely on that crutch of just looking up most words with Yomi-chan. I'm still pretty bad at that, so I need to work on it a lot more, but I think I'm around 40 hours into reading it now, and I'm close to finishing it. I'm at the point where I've kind of seen most of the words that are being used, and I'm still able to sentence mine a good amount, maybe 10 cards per day. So I am still getting a lot of value out of reading it. I think mostly my grammar improved just from reading. I haven't really done much work on it apart from reading some take-in. So that's been kind of an unexpected bonus of just reading, is my grammar improved greatly. And I think I'll be finished reading this in maybe another 10 or 20 hours. After I finish reading this, I'm probably going to move on to reading I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, since it's by the same author, I believe, or Bloom Into You. Both of them seem like something I would actually be interested in reading. I can see light novels being my main immersion probably for the next month. I don't think I'll be watching much anime. I definitely won't be reading any manga or visual novels, mostly because I'd rather just be reading a light novel at this point. I guess I'll quickly talk about my current skill level right now. For vocab, I think on Anki I'm at around 2.2k cards, but realistically I think it's probably around like 1.3k that I can actually remember. Maybe a bit more. It's kind of hard to measure that, I guess. For grammar, I thought this would be my weakest point, but just from immersing, I think I've picked up a lot more than I was expecting. I'm definitely not at the point where there's really hard grammar points being used, so maybe when it starts to pick up, when I'm reading something a bit more difficult, I'll struggle a lot more, but probably just continue doing what I'm doing. Maybe I'll read more take-in if I feel like I need it, but I'm pretty comfortable with where I'm at right now. For my listening, definitely is my weakest point right now, which is pretty bad considering I'm going to Japan and it's probably something I need to actually work on. I think I'll probably plan to read for another month and then move on to doing a lot more listening. So it'll probably be maybe a 50-50 split of reading and listening, since I do still want to read a lot. I feel like not only have I increased my vocab a lot, but also my grammar. I know for a lot of people there's quite a big gap between reading and listening, so I definitely want to try and close that gap a bit more, but I think for now I'm happy with just reading for maybe another month or so, and then I'll probably move on to a 50-50 split of listening and reading per day. And obviously with speaking, I haven't done any output at all, so I'll probably do some practice, maybe on italki, before actually going to Japan, just so I'm a bit more comfortable when I get there. But I'm not too worried about it. I think since I'm in Japan for so long, I've definitely got time to improve while I'm there, and that would be the easiest way for me to go about practicing my output. As for watching anime, I'd say when I'm watching with subs, and if it's a slice of life aimed at like a younger audience, I guess, I can maybe understand around 60 to 70%. I can get the main plot of what's happening and sometimes just fully understand it, but then there's other times where I'll understand barely anything. And without subs, I'd probably say I understand maybe 20 or 30%. In the third season of Takagi-san, I watched the first episode without subs and was finding it quite hard to follow along with what was actually happening. If there was no visual context, I would be completely lost. But after rewatching it with subs, I realized that I actually knew almost everything that was happening. I just couldn't hear it, so definitely need to work on that. When it comes to reading, I think it's definitely my strongest point. When I first started reading my first light novel, I was reading at maybe around 1.8 to 2k characters per hour, but after I think it's been 10 days and 40 hours, I'm now comfortably at around 2.6 to 2.8 characters per hour. So there's definitely been a decent improvement. I think after the next month, if I just continue reading, I'd probably like that to be at around 4k characters per hour, and I'd be happy with that. I'd definitely say while I enjoy reading, I'm not quite at the point where it doesn't feel taxing to do. Sometimes I'll just straight up get a headache because I'm thinking so much about what I'm actually reading and trying to figure out what's being said. It just gives me a headache. I'm hoping by the end of next month it doesn't really feel as taxing to read, and I can just go for a few hours at a time and don't really feel like I need to stop for a break. I'll quickly talk about my current immersion times. I started tracking on the 23rd of March and it's now the 25th of April. And as for Anki, I've currently done 62 hours. For listening immersion, I've done 64 hours. That includes watching streams, YouTube and anime. But for just anime alone, I've done 57 hours. So it's pretty much just anime that I've done so far. For my reading, I've done 93 hours, and that's 45 hours on visual novels and 41 hours on light novels. In total, that's 220 hours, which in a month I think I'm happy with. My daily average so far has been 6 hours and 40 minutes, and my daily immersion has been 5 hours and 20 minutes. So I definitely want to try and push that daily immersion up to 6 to 7 hours. But overall, I'm pretty happy with my first month of immersing. So I'll probably make another update video next month. I think some of my goals for that will be aiming for around 7 hours of immersion per day. I'll probably still be doing 5 to 6 hours of reading and maybe add 1 to 2 hours of listening on that. I think I'll probably still stick with watching anime with subs at the moment, but definitely by the end of next month I'll swap to no subs and just focus purely on listening. If my time to finish Anki goes under 1 hour, I'll probably increase the cards that I'm doing per day to around 40 for the core and 10 sentence cards maybe. As long as it's not going over maybe an hour 20 to an hour 30, I think I'm happy with Anki. But yeah, I guess that's it for this video. Like I said before, I'll probably make another video in a month to see how much progress I've made. So thanks for watching.